There was a time when I thought my life was set. I had married the woman of my dreams, a woman I believed to be kind, devoted, and a perfect mother to our children. We had built a comfortable life together, filled with laughter, shared ambitions, and what I thought was mutual respect. Our home, a modest yet well-kept house in a quiet neighborhood, was the kind of place people would drive by and assume happiness lived inside. And for years I believed it too. I met Emily in college. She was stunning, the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. But it wasn't just her beauty that caught me. It was her charm, her wit, and the way she made me feel like the only man in the world. I had never been the kind of guy to believe in fate, but when I met her, I thought maybe destiny did exist. We fell into each other's lives effortlessly, and within a few years, we were married. It was perfect. Or so I had convinced myself. Our early years together were filled with all the things young couples experience: tight finances, late-night conversations about our dreams, and small victories that felt like grand achievements. We worked hard, built careers, and eventually moved into the house where I thought we would grow old together. We had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, and for a long time, I saw Emily as the perfect wife and mother. She seemed happy, or at least that's what she led me to believe. Looking back, I wonder when things started to shift. Was it subtle at first? A lingering glance at her phone, an unexplained change in her schedule, or the way she had slowly withdrawn from me? The thing about betrayal is that you never see it when you're inside the illusion. You want to believe in the love you built, in the family you created. You want to trust that the woman who once swore to be by your side still means it. I worked long hours to provide for my family, often coming home exhausted but proud of what I was doing for them. Emily had a job too, but her hours were flexible, and she always seemed to have more time for herself. I never questioned where she went or who she spent time with. I trusted her. That trust would become my greatest mistake. The first real sign, the first crack in the illusion, came when I noticed how distant she had become. She no longer looked at me the same way. Our conversations were filled with empty words, mere exchanges about the children or household tasks. Gone were the days when she laughed at my jokes or reached for my hand without hesitation. I told myself it was normal, that after years together, passion fades. But deep down, something gnawed at me, a feeling I couldn't quite name, an unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. Still, I ignored it. Because to acknowledge it would mean admitting that something was wrong. And if something was wrong, it meant I had to do something about it. And doing something about it meant risking everything. I convinced myself that it was just a phase. Maybe she was stressed, maybe she needed space, maybe I just wasn't doing enough as a husband. So I tried harder. I planned more date nights, I bought her gifts, I even started coming home earlier to spend more time with her. But nothing changed. If anything, she pulled away even more. I didn't know then what I know now. That no matter how much love you give, no matter how hard you try, you can't stop someone from betraying you once they've decided to do it. And Emily had decided. Life has a way of making fools out of men who trust too easily. I used to think trust was the foundation of a strong marriage, but now I see it for what it truly is, a loaded gun you hand to the person you love, hoping they'll never pull the trigger. I started noticing things. Small things at first, little inconsistencies that, on their own, meant nothing. But when pieced together, they painted a picture I wasn't ready to see. Emily had always been meticulous about her appearance, but something had changed. She was spending more time getting ready, wearing new outfits I had never seen before. Her perfume was stronger, more alluring, as if she was trying to leave an impression on someone. She started going to the gym, something she had never been interested in before. When I asked her about it, she laughed and said she just wanted to feel better about herself. I believed her. Because why wouldn't I? Then came the late nights. At first, it was the occasional girls' night out, nothing unusual. But then they became more frequent. And then there were the work meetings, the weekend errands that took hours longer than they should have, the phone calls she took in the other room. The first time I questioned her about it, she smiled, kissed my cheek, and called me paranoid. So I let it go. Because that's what love does, it makes you doubt yourself instead of the person who's hurting you. But the signs kept piling up. She started guarding her phone like it was a lifeline. It was always in her hand, face down on the table, silenced so I wouldn't hear the notifications. I wasn't the kind of man to snoop, but temptation gnawed at me. I told myself that if I looked and found nothing, I would feel guilty for doubting her. But if I found something, then what? So, I did nothing. I buried my suspicions, convincing myself that I was imagining things. That maybe we had just fallen into a routine, that maybe the excitement had faded, and she was trying to reignite something within herself. I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't giving her enough attention. Maybe I had let work consume me. Maybe if I just loved her harder, things would go back to the way they were. But love doesn't work like that. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that made my skin prickle. The kids were at a sleepover, and I expected to find Emily curled up on the couch with a book like she always did. But she wasn't there. Her purse was gone. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I checked my phone, but there were no messages from her. Maybe she had gone out for groceries. Maybe she had stepped out for a walk. But I knew better. I sat in the dark, staring at the front door, waiting for her to come home. Minutes turned into an hour. Then 2. When she finally walked in, her hair was slightly messy, her makeup smudged, and she smelled of alcohol and something else, something that made my stomach tighten. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask where she had been. Because for the first time, I was afraid of the answer. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I could feel the distance between us, an invisible wall that hadn't been there before. And I realized something. I was losing her. Or maybe, she was already gone. The mind has a cruel way of tormenting itself when it knows the truth but refuses to accept it. Every time I looked at Emily, I saw the woman I had married, the woman I had built a life with, the mother of my children. But beneath that familiar face was someone I no longer recognized. The late nights continued, the excuses became more elaborate, and my patience wore thinner with each passing day. Work ran late. Traffic was terrible. I stopped by Sarah's place for a drink. At first I had forced myself to believe them, to brush off my suspicions as paranoia. But no matter how much I tried to push the doubts away, they lingered, clawing at the edges of my thoughts like an itch I couldn't scratch. Something wasn't right. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. She was slipping away, and no matter how much I tried to hold on to the illusion of our marriage, it was slipping through my fingers like sand. I told myself I was overreacting, that all marriages go through rough patches. But deep down, I knew better. The signs were everywhere, impossible to ignore. Her phone, once casually left on the counter or coffee table, was now glued to her side at all times. The screen was always face down, her messages silenced, her password changed. When she thought I wasn't looking, I saw the way she would glance at it, a small, secret smile curling at the corners of her lips, a look she hadn't given me in months. It made me sick. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that I was reading too much into things, but every instinct in my body screamed at me that something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. One night, I woke up and reached for her, only to find the bed empty. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the bathroom light. I turned my head, and through the cracked door, I saw the soft glow of her phone screen illuminating the darkness. She was whispering. My chest tightened. I wasn't the kind of man who eavesdropped, who snuck around looking for reasons to be angry. But at that moment I had to know. I had to hear it with my own ears. I held my breath, focusing on the hushed, tender tone of her voice. I miss you too, she said, a soft, almost teasing lilt in her voice. A pause, followed by a quiet giggle. Then the words that shattered any lingering hope I had left. I can't wait to see you again. I shut my eyes, my entire body stiffening as my mind raced through the possibilities. She could have been talking to a friend, maybe a coworker, but I knew better. The warmth in her voice, the secretive way she spoke, The way she had been acting for months, it all added up to one single, undeniable truth. My wife was having an affair. I clenched my fists beneath the covers, forcing myself to breathe evenly as I heard the water run. A moment later, she slipped back into bed, her scent a mixture of soap and something else, something that made my stomach twist into knots. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her breathing as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I watched her. Every movement, every glance at her phone, every pause in conversation when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I saw it now, the distance, the disinterest, the way she seemed present in body but not in spirit. I had spent months convincing myself I was imagining things, but now, I knew the truth. And yet, knowing wasn't enough. I needed proof. I needed something concrete, something undeniable. Because as much as I hated to admit it, a part of me still clung to the hope that I was wrong, that there was an explanation for all of this. So, I did what I swore I'd never do. I waited until she was in the shower, her phone left carelessly on the dresser. I picked it up, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands were shaking as I entered the passcode. It had changed. Of course it had. I tried the old one, no luck. I tried the kids' birthdays, our anniversary. Nothing. Then I paused, took a breath, and tried our wedding date. The lock screen disappeared, and I was in. A cruel irony. What I found destroyed any last shred of doubt I had left. Messages, dozens of them, some from numbers without names, some from names I didn't recognize. But the content was unmistakable. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. I love the way you taste. Can't wait to see you again, baby. My stomach dropped as I scrolled, my vision blurring with rage. Pictures. Some of her, some of them. Men I didn't know. Strangers who had touched her, held her, kissed the lips that once belonged only to me. My hands trembled, my breathing ragged as I fought against the overwhelming urge to smash the phone into the wall. My entire body felt like it was on fire, my blood boiling with a fury I had never known before. I wanted to wake her up, to shake her, to demand an explanation, but I already knew there was none that would satisfy me. The woman sleeping beside me wasn't my wife. Not anymore. She had made her choice, long before I had ever suspected a thing. She had given herself to other men while I was at home, working, trusting, loving her like a fool. As I put the phone back where I found it, my hands clenched into fists. I didn't wake her up. I didn't scream or throw things or demand answers. Instead, I lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with one single, unshakable thought. She thought she had gotten away with it. She thought I was blind. She thought I was weak. But she was wrong. Very, very wrong. Something inside me broke that night. Lying beside Emily, knowing the truth and yet saying nothing, felt like suffocating beneath a weight I couldn't lift. I had spent years believing in us, in the family we had built, in the vows we had exchanged. But in the end, I was just another man fooled by the woman he loved. I wanted to rage, to scream, to tear through the house and destroy everything that reminded me of her, of us. But I didn't. I forced myself to stay calm. Because I knew now that this wasn't just about one mistake, one lapse in judgment. This was a choice she had made, over and over again. And I needed to know just how deep the betrayal ran. Over the next few weeks, I watched her more closely than ever. I stopped confronting her, stopped asking questions that would only lead to more lies. Instead, I observed. I noted the way she would leave the house dressed just a little too perfectly for a simple girls' night. I saw how she would linger in front of the mirror, adjusting her blouse, checking her lipstick, her eyes glowing with a kind of excitement she never had for me anymore. I paid attention to the way she guarded her phone, the way her fingers flew across the screen, smiling at messages that were never meant for me. And then there were the disappearances, weekend errands that lasted hours longer than they should, unexplained meetings that left her coming home late, smelling of something foreign, something wrong. It wasn't long before I confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't just cheating, she was doing it regularly, carelessly, as if I didn't even exist. And worse, it wasn't just one man. The messages on her phone made that clear. There were multiple names, different conversations, different locations. This wasn't a love affair, some foolish romance that had stolen her away. No, this was something else entirely. She had turned our marriage into a lie, a convenience, something she returned to after indulging in whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted. The moment that sealed everything for me happened one evening when she thought I had left for work. I had told her I had an early shift, something that required me to be out of the house before sunrise. But instead of leaving, I parked down the street, waiting. The minutes dragged on, my stomach churning with a sickness that had nothing to do with nerves. I already knew what I was about to see. But I needed to see it for myself. When the sleek black car pulled into the driveway less than half an hour after I was supposedly gone, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. A man stepped out, tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who had money, power. He moved with confidence, the way a man does when he knows he belongs. And then the front door opened, and Emily stepped outside. She was wearing the silky robe I had bought her for our anniversary years ago, the one she had barely worn for me. She smiled at him, the kind of smile that had once been mine, and then she kissed him. I had seen enough. I drove away before my anger could get the better of me, my vision blurred with a fury that I had never felt before. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay there, couldn't bear to see any more. The truth was undeniable now. My wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was a liar, a manipulator, a woman who had spent years pretending to be someone she wasn't. And I had been too blind, too trusting to see it. But not anymore. She thought she was in control. She thought she had fooled me, that I would go on living in ignorance while she did as she pleased. But she was wrong. Because now, I knew exactly who she was. And soon, she was going to know exactly who I was, too. I carried the weight of my discovery like a disease, eating away at me from the inside. Knowing the truth was one thing, but pretending not to know, pretending to go about life as if my marriage wasn't a carefully constructed lie, was a slow kind of agony. Every morning, I woke up next to the woman who had betrayed me, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Every night, I watched her slip into bed with me, her body inches away, knowing she had given herself to another man. No, not just one, to others, plural. I had seen the proof with my own eyes, felt the sickness of it churn inside me, and yet I had said nothing. Because this wasn't just about anger anymore. This was about patience. This was about control. This was about letting her believe she had won, letting her believe she had fooled me completely. I began piecing together the details of her infidelity, filling in the gaps between the late nights and suspicious absences. I checked our shared bank statements, something I had never bothered to do before, and found charges that made my stomach turn: hotel stays, expensive dinners, shopping trips to lingerie stores where I knew she hadn't bought anything for me. The names on the receipts weren't familiar, but I knew they belonged to them, to the men she had been sneaking around with. She was careless, confident in my ignorance, and that was her first mistake. She didn't just have one lover, she had multiple. The texts had shown me that much. But one name kept coming up more than the others, a man I now knew by face. The well-dressed man in the black car, the one she had welcomed into my home like it was hers alone to share. He was older than me, polished in a way that suggested wealth, someone who could offer her something I apparently couldn't. Was it the money? The excitement? The thrill of deception? Whatever it wasn't love. She wasn't looking for love. She was looking for indulgence, for escape, for something to fuel whatever selfish hunger had taken over the woman I once believed I knew. It wasn't just him, though. I saw the messages from another man, someone younger, someone who talked to her like she was his dirty little secret, someone who made her feel reckless and desired in a way I apparently never could. The way she responded to him, the way she flirted back, was nauseating. I could barely believe I was reading words written by my wife, the mother of my children. I wondered if she thought of me at all before meeting them. If she ever hesitated before letting their hands replace mine, before letting them into the space that was supposed to belong to us. Or had I been erased completely in those moments? Did I even exist to her any more outside of convenience? Every day became an exercise in restraint. I sat across from her at dinner, watching her smile at the kids like she was still the devoted mother, the perfect wife. I listened as she told me about her day, her voice filled with practiced normalcy, as if she weren't lying through her teeth. I studied her, memorizing the way she carried herself, the way she played her roles so effortlessly. And with each passing day, my hatred grew. I had never known I was capable of such rage, such cold, calculating fury. It didn't burn hot, it was slow, deliberate, like the tightening of a noose. She thought she had fooled me, but she had only given me time. Time to watch, time to plan. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I wasn't going to give her the chance to twist the truth, to cry, to beg for forgiveness she didn't deserve. No, I was going to let her keep digging her own grave. Because the deeper she went, the harder it would be for her to climb out when the time came. She had taken everything from me, my trust, my love, the life I thought we had built together. And soon, I was going to take something from her too. She just didn't know it yet. The days blurred into weeks, and with each passing moment, I solidified my plan. I moved carefully, deliberately, ensuring that every step I took remained invisible to Emily. She still carried on as if nothing had changed, smiling, laughing, playing the role of the devoted wife, all while lying to my face. I no longer looked at her the same way. Where I once saw the woman I had loved, I now saw a stranger, a parasite that had embedded itself into my life, feeding off my trust, my effort, my devotion. She had no idea that I had already begun unraveling the web of deception she had built around herself. I followed her once. It wasn't hard. She had become complacent, overconfident in my ignorance. She told me she was going to a late meeting, some work function that required her to be out for a few hours. I acted indifferent, nodding, giving her a half-hearted, "Okay, have fun." I watched as she left the house, dressed in something far too revealing for a business meeting, her perfume lingering in the air long after she was gone. Instead of staying home, I grabbed my keys and followed. I kept my distance, trailing her car down familiar streets until she pulled into the parking lot of a high-end hotel on the other side of town. There was no hesitation, no looking over her shoulder, no hint of guilt or second-guessing. She walked through those glass doors like she belonged there, like she had done this 100 times before. She never even glanced back. She wasn't worried about being caught because she truly believed I was too blind, too trusting, too stupid to ever suspect a thing. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring at the hotel entrance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I imagined her in that room, imagined the hands that weren't mine pulling her close, imagined the whispers, the touches, the sounds. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe, to push down the red-hot anger boiling inside me. This wasn't the time. I wasn't ready yet. I had to wait, had to be patient. Bursting through that door and confronting her now would only give her the chance to cry, to lie, to manipulate. No. I needed her to feel the full weight of what she had done. Instead of storming inside, I took out my phone and snapped a picture of her car in the parking lot. I zoomed in on the license plate, on the hotel's glowing sign in the background. Cold, irrefutable proof. And I wasn't done collecting it. Over the next few days, I installed small cameras inside the house, nothing obvious, nothing that would raise suspicion. A tiny one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one right near the front door. I bought a GPS tracker, the kind that could be discreetly placed under the car, and waited for the perfect moment to slip it into place. It was almost too easy. While she showered, I stepped outside and secured it beneath her vehicle, ensuring it was well hidden. By the time I walked back inside, she was still humming to herself, completely unaware that her movements were now under my control. She had built her life on deception, thinking she was untouchable. But she had underestimated me. The moment she decided to betray me, she had signed away any mercy I might have once had for her. She thought she was winning, thought she was getting away with it, but in reality, she was walking straight into the trap I was setting for her. I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to destroy her. There is something sickening about watching the person you once loved transform into a stranger before your eyes. I had spent weeks collecting evidence, each discovery twisting the knife deeper into my gut. Every lie, every late-night disappearance, every trace of another man on her body, it all built up like a slow-burning fire, growing hotter and more unbearable by the day. But Emily had no idea. She still walked around our home with the arrogance of someone who believed she had outsmarted everyone, wearing her deception like a second skin, never once considering that her time was running out. The GPS tracker told me everything I needed to know. Her routines, her secret meetings, the way she would drive across town and park in the same places over and over again. She had become predictable, her betrayals forming patterns so obvious I almost laughed at how little effort she put into covering her tracks. I knew exactly which nights she would disappear, which excuses she would use, which lies she would whisper as she kissed me goodbye. She thought she had mastered the art of deception, but in reality, she was just following a script she didn't realize I had already memorized. The cameras inside the house recorded her phone calls when she thought she was alone. I listened as she whispered to them, sweet words, dirty words, promises of things she had no business offering. The way she spoke to them was different from how she spoke to me now. With me, it was all rehearsed, like she was playing a part she had grown tired of. But with them? She was alive, eager, hungry. She laughed in ways I hadn't heard in years. She moaned softly when they flirted with her, played coy when they asked her when they would see her again. I learned their names. Their routines. I knew which ones were serious, and which ones were just distractions. The older, well-dressed man was more than just a fling. She saw him the most, spent the most time with him. He bought her expensive gifts, jewelry she never wore at home, designer bags she kept hidden in the trunk of her car. He was the one she went to when she wanted to feel spoiled, wanted to be pampered. The younger one, the athlete, was different. He was for fun, for excitement, for passion. She met him in places that were less careful, back seats of cars, dark corners of parking garages, hotel rooms booked for just a few hours at a time. I knew more than I ever wanted to know. And yet I kept digging, because every piece of information brought me closer to what I needed: absolute control over the moment I would destroy her. She had given me the perfect opportunity without even realizing it. One evening, she told me she was going on a weekend retreat, with her coworkers, something about team building, about networking. She fed me the lie with a straight face, her expression so convincing that if I hadn't already known the truth, I might have believed her. She even made sure to mention that she wouldn't have much cell service, just in case I called and she didn't pick up. I nodded, pretending to be distracted, pretending I wasn't already 5 steps ahead of her. That Friday, she packed her bags, kissed me on the cheek like she always did, and walked out of our home for what she thought was just another carefree weekend with another man. But this time, she wasn't the only one with a plan. I waited for her GPS location to settle, some fancy resort a few towns over, a place she would never have considered taking me, but had no problem visiting with him. Then I gathered everything. The photos. The videos. The messages. The evidence of every secret she thought she had buried. I put it all together, neatly organized, undeniable. And then I made sure everyone saw it. Her family. Her friends. The people who still thought she was the devoted wife, the loving mother. The ones who needed to know exactly who she had become. And lastly, I made sure her lover saw it too. The man who thought he had stolen another man's wife. The man who believed he had something special. I wanted him to see what she really was. Just another liar, just another cheater, just another woman who thought she could have it all without consequence. And as I pressed send, as I let the truth explode into the world she had so carefully constructed, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Because now, there was no going back. The fallout was immediate. I had detonated the bomb in the quiet hours of the night, sending out the files to everyone who mattered, and by morning, Emily's world was in ruins. Calls and messages flooded her phone before she even had a chance to return home. I knew, because I was watching. The GPS tracker showed her pacing around the resort, her location darting between the lobby and the parking lot, no doubt panicking as she tried to contain the fire. But this wasn't a small flame she could stamp out with lies and fake tears. This was an inferno, and I had made sure there was no escape. I didn't answer her calls. I let her feel the weight of what I had done, let her sit in the mess she had created. She had spent years lying to my face, making me feel like I was the fool, and now, for the first time, she was the one who didn't know what was coming next. When she finally came home late Sunday evening, looking exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red, she tried to reach for me, but I stepped away. "We need to talk," she had the audacity to say, her voice trembling as if she was the victim in all this. I let her sit in silence, her hands clenched in her lap, waiting for me to explode, waiting for the screaming, the accusations. But that wasn't how I played this game. I had moved beyond anger. I was past the heartbreak, past the disbelief. What I felt now was colder, sharper, something far more dangerous. I pulled out the DNA test results I had taken in secret, the ones I had sent in weeks ago, the ones I had been dreading but expecting all the same. And then, I placed them in front of her. She looked at them, confused at first, her fingers hovering over the papers before finally picking them up. I watched as her eyes moved over the words, her face draining of color with every passing second. She started shaking her head before she even finished reading, her lips parting, struggling to form words. But I already knew what she was going to say. I had played this moment out in my head 100 times. "They're not mine," I said flatly, the finality of it settling into the air between us. The children I had spent years raising, loving, sacrificing for, they weren't mine. Not by blood. Not in any way that mattered now. My entire life had been built on a lie so elaborate, so carefully orchestrated, that I almost wanted to applaud her for keeping it hidden for as long as she did. Almost. She broke then. She started crying, sobbing, reaching for me, but I didn't move. I let her fall apart in front of me, let her beg and plead, let her try to spin whatever story she thought would lessen the blow. But there was no softening this. There was no coming back from this. She had stolen everything from me, my love, my trust, my future, even my lineage. The very blood that I thought carried my name had belonged to someone else all along. I stood up. "Get out." The words came out calm, steady, with none of the fire she had probably expected. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to curse or scream. My voice carried more weight in its stillness than any outburst ever could. She looked up at me, eyes wide, disbelieving. What?" she stammered, as if she had misheard. As if she had forgotten who I was, what I was capable of. I repeated myself. "Get out." She shook her head, panicked now. "Wait, please." She reached for me again, but I stepped away. "Where am I supposed to go? The kids, they're not mine." The words were a knife to both of us, cutting through whatever illusion of a family we had left. She flinched, her sobs turning desperate, but I didn't care. I walked past her, through the house that was no longer hers, the house she had desecrated, the home she had turned into a lie. I opened the front door. "You have 5 minutes." She pleaded, she begged, she tried to reason, but there was no reasoning with me anymore. I had been merciful for too long, had swallowed my suspicions, ignored the truth staring me in the face. But now I was free. And she? She had lost everything. She didn't even have time to pack a bag. When I closed the door behind her, locking it for the last time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The moment I locked that door, I knew I would never let her back in. Emily stood outside, pounding on the wood, her sobs barely muffled by the walls that once sheltered our so-called marriage. Her voice cracked as she begged me to talk, to reconsider, to think of the kids. The kids. The ones I had spent years raising, holding, loving, children who I now knew had never been mine. Her desperation didn't move me. Her tears meant nothing. She had made me a fool for years, stripped me of everything I thought I had, and now she was paying the price. I didn't open the door. I didn't argue. I let her scream, let her sob, let her break down in the very driveway where she had kissed me goodbye countless times before running off to another man's arms. But now there was no warm home for her to return to. No safety, no comfort. Just a cold, unforgiving night. I heard her shuffle around, probably fumbling for her phone to call someone, one of her lovers, maybe, the same men she had ruined our marriage for. Let them deal with her now. Let them see her for the wreck she had become. Inside, I moved with purpose. Every trace of her had to be erased. I went to our bedroom first, to the closet filled with clothes I had bought her over the years, dresses she had worn to dinners with me, but also the ones she had worn for them. The thought made my stomach turn. I yanked them from the hangers, tossing them onto the floor in a heap. Her shoes, her jewelry, her perfumes, all of it. It didn't belong here anymore. She didn't belong here anymore. I grabbed trash bags, stuffing everything inside without hesitation. The house smelled like her, but soon, it wouldn't. The next step was the photos. I went through the living room, the hallway, our bedroom, pulling down every framed lie that depicted us as a happy couple. Our wedding photo came down first. I stared at it for a long time, remembering the man I used to be, the man who had stood at the altar believing in forever. I didn't recognize him anymore. I smashed the frame against the wall, watching the glass shatter, watching pieces of what was once my life scatter across the floor. The house was quiet without her, eerily so. I should have felt empty, but I didn't. I felt lighter. Stronger. Like I had been carrying a disease inside me for years and was finally purging it from my body. I moved through every room, erasing her presence one item at a time. The couch where she used to curl up and fake exhaustion after spending hours with another man? I flipped the cushions, determined to rid them of whatever filth she had left behind. The bathroom where she had stood, fixing her hair and makeup before sneaking off to her lovers? I grabbed every last bottle of her expensive shampoos, her creams, her lotions, and dumped them into the trash. Then, there was the matter of the kids. My stomach clenched at the thought of them, the betrayal cutting deeper than anything else. I had been a father to them. I had wiped their tears, held them when they were sick, cheered them on at school events. I had thought they were my blood. But they weren't. And yet, despite everything, they were innocent in all of this. They had no idea what their mother had done. They didn't choose this betrayal. I picked up my phone and typed a message. "Come get your kids." That was all I sent her. She called immediately, her name flashing across the screen. I let it ring. I let it ring again and again until finally she stopped. Then, I sent a second message. "They are not mine. I owe them nothing. You have 10 minutes. Minutes later, headlights pulled into the driveway. I watched through the blinds as she stepped out of the car, her face streaked with tears, panic written all over her. I didn't go outside. I didn't give her the satisfaction of another conversation. I had nothing left to say to her. The kids weren't home yet. They were at my parents' house for the weekend. She would have to go there and face them herself. She would have to be the one to explain why their world had just fallen apart. That wasn't my burden anymore. As she stood there in the driveway, looking lost, looking ruined, I let myself feel the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The lies, the betrayals, the wasted years. And then, just as quickly, I let it go. Because Emily had already taken enough from me. She had stolen my trust, my marriage, my sense of self. But now, I had taken something from her too. I had taken away her comfort, her security, her illusion of control. I turned off the porch light, casting her into darkness. Then I walked away from the window, away from the past, away from the woman who had once been my wife. She wasn't my problem anymore. And for the first time in years, I finally felt free. The silence in the house was unlike anything I had ever known. No more fake laughter filling the rooms, no more whispered lies over the phone when she thought I wasn't listening, no more traces of her lingering in the air like a sickness I couldn't shake. Emily was gone. And this time, it was permanent. After she had left that night, I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, letting the weight of everything settle over me. The rage had passed, the heartbreak had dulled into something colder, something heavier. I had spent years building a life with her, years believing in a marriage that had never truly existed. And now? Now I had to figure out what life looked like without her. Without the kids who had never been mine. Without the routine I had once believed would last forever. The next morning, I made sure every last trace of her was gone. The trash bags full of her things. I drove them to a donation center, not even bothering to sort through them. The house felt lighter with every box I removed, with every memory I erased. I deep-cleaned every inch, washing away every last bit of her presence. It wasn't about anger anymore, it was about reclaiming what was mine. This was my home. My space. And she no longer had a place in it. The hardest part was dealing with the kids. They had been dropped off at her sister's house after she had broken down in front of my parents, trying to explain why everything had changed overnight. I hadn't answered their calls, hadn't responded to their messages. What could I say? That I still loved them, even if they weren't mine? That I wished things could have been different, even though the very sight of them now was a reminder of how deeply I had been betrayed? I wasn't heartless. I knew they were innocent. But that didn't change the fact that every time I looked at them, all I saw was the lie. The years I had wasted, the sacrifices I had made for children who had never truly been mine. I had given them everything, and in return, I had been given nothing but betrayal. I wasn't ready to face them yet. Maybe one day, but not now. Emily kept trying to contact me. At first, it was calls, desperate, pleading voicemails I refused to listen to. Then came the texts. Apologies, excuses, frantic messages about how she was losing everything. Then the threats. That she would take me to court, that she would fight for the house, for support, for whatever scraps she thought she could still get from me. I ignored her. She had already lost. I had prepared for this. The moment I had received those DNA test results, I had gone to a lawyer, had everything put in place. The house was mine, purchased before the marriage, in my name alone. The accounts were already locked down. She had no claim to anything. She had already taken enough from me. I wasn't going to let her take 1 cent more. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the routine of life without her became normal. The bed no longer felt empty, it felt like mine. The house, once a constant reminder of everything I had lost, now felt like a fresh start. I changed things. Rearranged the furniture, repainted the walls, got rid of anything that reminded me of her. It was cleansing. Necessary. I found myself laughing again, not the hollow kind of laughter I had faked for years, but real, genuine laughter. I started going out more, reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with during my marriage. They had always seen the cracks, the signs I had ignored. Now they welcomed me back like a man who had finally woken up from a long, painful sleep. And for the first time in years, I could finally breathe. Emily had thought she could destroy me. She had thought I would crumble, that I would beg her to stay, that I would forgive her like a weak man blinded by love. But she had underestimated me. She had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my patience for ignorance. And in the end, she was the one left with nothing. I was free. And I was never going to let anyone take that from me again. Months passed, and with each day, the memory of Emily faded. What once felt like a gaping wound had turned into a scar, visible, permanent, but no longer painful. I had spent too many years drowning in lies, suffocating under the weight of betrayal. Now, I was learning how to live again. Without her. Without the illusion of the family I thought I had. Without the burden of loving someone who had never truly been mine. She tried to fight. Of course, she did. After the dust had settled, after the reality of what she had lost sank in, she tried to claw her way back into my life. The messages never stopped. shifting between remorse and rage, between apologies and threats. She tried to paint herself as the victim, to twist the story into something that would make her look like the wounded party. She told people I had abandoned her, that I was cold, that I had destroyed our family over a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, one she had made, again and again, without hesitation, without guilt. And now, she was finally suffering the consequences. She begged to meet. Just once. For closure, she claimed. I ignored her. Closure? There was no closure to be found in speaking to her. I had all the closure I needed the day I threw her out of my home. The day I erased every trace of her existence from my life. The day I realized I didn't need her, didn't want her, and never would again. The kids, that part was harder. I wasn't made of stone. I wasn't blind to the fact that they were victims in this, too. They had been lied to, just as I had. They had no idea the family they had grown up in was built on a lie. And as much as I wanted to walk away completely, to sever every tie, there was still a part of me that hesitated. Because no matter what the DNA said, no matter what the truth revealed, I had been their father for years. I had held them when they were scared. I had celebrated their victories, comforted them through their losses. One night, after ignoring their messages for weeks, I finally responded. We need to talk. It wasn't about them. It wasn't about me. It was about honesty. About giving them what Emily never had, the truth. We met at a cafe, neutral ground, a place where emotions couldn't explode behind closed doors. They sat across from me, their eyes filled with confusion, hurt, anger. And for the first time, I told them everything. The affairs. The lies. The DNA test. The fact that, biologically, they weren't mine. The words felt heavy coming out, but I forced myself to say them. They deserved to know. Silence stretched between us when I finished. My son, the older one, clenched his jaw, his fists tightening on the table. My daughter, my little girl, the one I had once thought would always be my baby, had tears in her eyes. So, you're not our dad? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a breath. I raised you. I loved you. That part was never a lie. They didn't take it well. How could they? Their world had shattered just as mine had. But I had given them something their mother never did, honesty. And no matter how much it hurt, I knew I had done the right thing. Over time, things settled. They still spoke to Emily, still tried to hold on to the only family they had ever known. But they also kept in touch with me. It wasn't the same, and it never would be, but it was something. A choice they had to make for themselves, just as I had made mine. As for Emily? She faded into the background. She tried to rebuild, but she never truly recovered. The men she had betrayed me for? They disappeared. One by one, they abandoned her, just as she had abandoned me. She lost the house, lost the security, lost the comfort she had taken for granted. Last I heard, she was living in a small apartment, working a job she hated, struggling to piece together the wreckage of her life. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not even for a second. Because in the end, she had done this to herself. And I walked away from the fire she had started and never looked back.